Many people say that The Amazing Digital Circus tells Jack's story as a cautionary tale.
It's a story of consequence.
But I'm about to explain why I don't think that actually holds up. Jack's story focuses on his suffering and not on the consequences of his actions. And while this is aligned with the message of the show, it pushes the story away from being cautionary. Let me explain. But first, what makes a cautionary tale? You probably already know the definition, but let's go over it again real quick. Basically, a cautionary tale is a story that warns the audience against a behavior or a mindset by showing its harmful consequences. For a story to fit this description, I think the consequences should naturally follow what the character did. So if someone is a liar and then gets hit by a meteor falling from the sky, that doesn't count because it's not a consequence made by lying. The consequences also have to leave an impact somehow on the person doing the behavior that the story is against. Super simple, right? Bojack Horseman is a great example of this. Spoilers, by the way, but one of the worst things that he did is inviting his daughter figure, Sarah Lynn, who was a recovering addict, to relapse after 9 months of sobriety, spends weeks on a bender with her, lets her take the drugs that make her overdose, then waits 17 minutes before calling the ambulance that could have saved her life, just so that he can build himself an alibi and save his career. You can imagine that yes, he feels extreme guilt for this, but that's not the only consequence he faces. His reputation collapses, he's sued, fired from his job, lost his house, loses the only family he has left, and basically destroys all the relationships he has. Notice how the story shows internal, legal, and interpersonal consequences, and that's what makes it a good example of a cautionary tale in my opinion. Now let's go back to Jack's and why I don't think that his story hits the standard for a cautionary tale. I've seen people say that his abstraction is the actual consequence, but I don't think that actually holds up, and there are 3 reasons for it. First, abstraction isn't something that only happens to bad people, so it's not a moral or a narrative consequence. People abstract in the circus for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with the things they've done. Abstraction isn't a consequence that's specifically tied to Jack's actions, kinda like the meteor example I gave before. Secondly, nobody actually makes Jax confront the people that he hurt before he abstracted. Nobody asks him to explain himself, apologize, or talk about anything he's done to the main cast. Whatever price he pays to the plot and to us, the audience, but he doesn't pay the price to the people that he actually hurt. And the third reason is that a narrative consequence is something that a character has to live with. Abstraction removes Jax from the story before he can truly confront the damage he caused. He never has to hear how he affected the people around him, acknowledge it, or try to repair those relationships. In that sense, abstraction doesn't feel like a consequence but more like an escape from consequences. So while abstraction is extremely tragic, I just don't see it as the kind of outcome that makes his story cautionary. Now you may argue that he suffers internally and that is his consequence to bear. And I would agree actually. By the end of the story, he's feeling guilt, shame, and he hates himself. And those are real internal consequences. I don't want to dismiss them, but a cautionary tale usually doesn't stop at internal suffering. It also shows how someone's actions reshape their relationships and their place in the world. Not every story has to do that, but for a character-driven show like TDC, I think it's a very important piece of the puzzle that it's missing for it to be a cautionary tale. By the end, Gengal still cries for him, Zubul welcomes him back, Rakata even says that it should have been her who abstracted. And these reactions do support the show's themes, but they also mean that nobody really asks anything of him. They just forgive him without seeing a change, setting boundaries, or doing anything really. The story moves the characters fairly quickly towards understanding Jax or moving on from what he did, and because of that they never really hold him accountable or get justice for the way he treated them. And for me, this means the absence of interpersonal consequences, and that's what weakens the emotional payoff that you would expect from a cautionary tale. Now you may say that I'm being silly, and there actually are many interpersonal consequences. For example, the fights that Jax has with everybody, but I don't really see it that way. I don't see any of these fights as a meaningful, long-lasting consequence of his negative actions, and I'll tell you why. Let's take the fight that he has with Pomni in episode 6 as the first example. Yes, she argues with him, yes, she calls him out, but to me, the scene doesn't function as Pomni trying to hold him accountable, but more as the moment Pomni realizes that Jax is acting this way because he's hurting inside. This is the beginning of her becoming someone who helps him and refuses to give up on him. If there ever was a moment for the story to establish accomplish a lasting interpersonal consequence, this was the one. That could have looked like Pomni stepping back, asking for an apology, or simply refusing to see him for a while, but she doesn't do any of that. After she processes what happened, she's still looking for him. By episode 7, she's checking on him, encouraging him, and offering him her friendship again and again. The fight doesn't really make Pomni see Jax more negatively. If anything, it makes her see him in a sympathetic light, as someone who needs a friend. But after he says he enjoys watching her suffer, and that if she abstracted, he wouldn't care, tells her to shoot him, I personally think that that moment really calls for some kind of consequence, or at least a boundary before reconciliation. But instead, she lets him off the hook, and like so many of Jax's actions, it isn't really brought up again. The same thing happens when Zubul fights Jax. They argue, sure, but Jax brushes it off most of the time and plays it as a gag. Nothing really changes, it doesn't affect him, and their relationship carries on much the same as before. And when Ragatha finally snaps at him, she's the one who ends up apologizing and feeling guilty, while Jax barely takes the confrontation seriously. Sometimes those scenes and fights feel like the show is trying to convince the audience that Jax is actually being called out. Like, see, they're mad at him, there are consequences. But these consequences are superficial. Once the fight is over, it doesn't have a lasting impact. It's just people nagging Jax in the moment and then moving on. Nothing is truly changed. And that's why I think it's not an actual meaningful interpersonal consequence. Even if everybody distances themselves from him a little bit, he really doesn't care, so it doesn't affect him at all. And to give one more example of how Bojack Horseman tackles this in typical cautionary fashion, Bojack's cruelty is also a defense mechanism, just like Jax's. The show makes it very clear that his upbringing, his fear of love and vulnerability, and his addiction shaped who he is today. So we understand Bojack and we can empathize just like we do with Jax. But where Bojack is different is that the show never uses those things as an excuse and actively holds him accountable, even when he doesn't want to be. His best friend Diane ends up cutting ties with him for good. Princess Caroline sets up strict personal and professional boundaries, even though she still loves him to some degree. And Todd goes from best friend to a casual one. Even his sister just disappears from his life without a word. He doesn't just suffer internally, he faces real, tangible consequences that affect his life, even after genuinely trying to become a better person. TADC just takes a different approach. Pomni's care for Jax is close to unconditional. No matter how many times he pushes her away, she comes back. And it's because this is the intended message, that you can find connection and acceptance in a meaningless and uncontrollable existence. But I just don't think a story with this message can be cautionary. I personally think that people are mislabeling what Jax's story actually is. It's not a story of consequence, it's a story of acceptance. So while a story like Bojack's is meant to make you feel uncomfortable if you relate to him, TADC seems to take the opposite approach, teaching us that if you're struggling, there are people you can open up to and you can find healing, rather than showing us the negative consequences as a means for accountability. And whether that's a better message is up to each viewer, but for me, the message of the story is why Jax doesn't land as a cautionary tale. But hey, that's just me. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments, leave a like, subscribe, and if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching.